So is it the case then, and look, this might be a little bit naive in some ways, but there's almost a view of a phobia where it's the result of someone having a traumatic event and, to simplify it down, essentially not wanting to be in that traumatic situation again. So that's a situation that they become quite fearful of and phobic of, and that's where the phobia develops from. But is it the case that you need to go through a traumatic event to develop a phobia out of?
Not necessarily, and we could think of that situation where the awning smashed through the window as like a traumatic event, so to speak, or what could have been a traumatic event. But people tend to learn phobias from some kind of negative experience themselves. For example, that near drowning leading to a fear of not getting enough air, or people tend to pick it up from a parent. For example, could be a fear of snakes or who knows, spiders maybe. But as far as that goes, more commonly, there'll be some kind of events that have contributed to it, but it might not be an obviously traumatic event at the time. And it's more like the person can develop sometimes it can seem the person develops the idea of something being very dangerous to them, and it can be hard to really pinpoint what that might be. And certainly in psychodynamic therapy, sometimes it might be thought that the phobia is about something which represents a symbolic threat in some ways. And sometimes that's very hard to get at, what the source of that might be.
And so then how much is it the case that you need to understand that source of someone's phobia? Is it that you can almost build up a tool belt kind of in competition with the phobia, if you know what I mean? So you arm someone with the resources to be able to tackle it without necessarily addressing the problem? Or is it the case that addressing the problem and hitting it at the source is really the best case forward in all circumstances?
Okay, well, look, there are some mechanisms or strategies we'll talk about a little bit later that actually are the most important things for helping deal with a phobia, whatever leads to it or whatever the source of it might be. But it does help to understand the core of a phobia, and I'll give one example. Just say agoraphobia, where people might have a fear of being, say, away from home. And sometimes we ask people, do you have more of a fear in a crowded street or an empty street? Now, if people have a fear of being in a crowded street, then probably they're afraid of having a panic attack, but in a way that will make them look stupid or weird. So they're fearful of other people around and looking stupid by having a panic attack in front of other people. Whereas if people prefer a crowded street and they're fearful of an empty street, similarly, they're likely afraid of having a panic attack, but they might construe their panic attack as being physically dangerous. They might think they're about to have a heart attack because their heart's beating fast. So there it's more a fear of physical danger, and that person might find it very difficult to drive at any great distance from a hospital. And when they go to a new town, they might try and figure out quickly where the hospital is because they have a fear of some physical danger from a panic attack. So when we can understand that, then we can get more at the kind of nature of someone's thinking behind the fear, but also can help us tailor the ways that they face it to get the most benefit.
And so how is it that a phobia becomes developed? Because, look, I can think of sort of things back in my own life, for example, that were pretty scary at times, but it's not necessarily that I'm phobic of those things. So why is it that there's that discernment between a one-off event that causes fear and something that becomes phobic?
Okay, well, look, there's a mechanism called conditioning, which we learned about for phobias from a long ago experiment about this little boy Albert and the white rat. And this shows how a phobia can develop. What happened is this little boy Albert was exposed to a white rat, but every time he came in contact with a rat, then the experimenters made a sudden very loud noise, which was very aversive and unsettling. Now, each time the rat came near, this same loud noise. Now, Albert developed a phobia, an exaggerated persistent fear of the rat. We might consider that an unethical experiment these days, but it did show how a pairing of one situation with another could lead to distress. So it is possible that someone could be in a particular situation, like, for example, if they were in a cave and had a panic attack, then they might associate the panic attack with enclosed spaces, and especially caves, for example. It's a kind of conditioning. But also it could be learning or exaggerated learning from some past negative experience or near traumatic experience, like some that we mentioned earlier. And so there are a range of ways where people can develop phobias, including, as we said, learning from a parent. But there can be that conditioning aspect that happens, and we might not know in someone's history how their reaction was triggered by a particular situation that might have been paired with them feeling anxious for another reason.